Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings from Beijing. My name is John Russell. I'm the Managing Director of Sandpiper North Head here in Beijing. And welcome to this webinar on the outcomes of the China National People's Congress 2022, and particularly a discussion on the business opportunities in China arising from the Congress. I will be joined with this webinar by my colleague, Serena Cui, who is the Director of Public Affairs here in Beijing.
Hi, everyone.
First of all, let's have a look at the format for today. Really, first of all, particularly for those from outside the mainland, to look at a quick overview of what is the two sessions and the National People's Congress and their role in the economic planning and economic developments within the People's Republic of China. Then we'll go through and look at what were the 2022 priorities for this year, which will provide a roadmap for economic activities, and also to look back into 2021 briefly. Also, we're going to look at the uncertainty in the government strategy, given the overall international situation and the domestic situation here in China. And then, as I mentioned before, we're looking at the business opportunities and where there are opportunities for growth and developments, and particularly then some takeaways. With that, I would like to put it across to my colleague Serena to talk about the two sessions of the National People's Congress overall and why they're important.
Great. So now we just want to give you a quick update on what is China's leadership structure. So in China, the political system is divided into three major institutes: the Communist Party, government, and the military. Structurally, the Communist Party have three main groups: the Central Committee, the Politburo, and the Politburo Standing Committee. So each of these groups is respectively smaller and holds increasing power, political power. So for the Central Committee, they meet once per year at the preliminary session, which they will discuss policy changes. Normally, it's the most important leaders representing provincial government, state-owned enterprise, and party interests. So members are elected every 5 years from a pool of more than 2,000 delegates to the party congress. So then the Politburo is elected by members of the Central Committee and contains the 25 most senior members. And then the Politburo Standing Committee are among the 25 members, is centralized. Now there's currently 7 members. And then the blue side is the government side. So as we can see, State Council, under the State Council, there's currently 26 ministries and commissions, which oversees the business operation in China in different sectors. Here is just a brief description of what are the two sessions. So the two sessions means NPC and CPPCC, which NPC represents National People Congress, and then the other means People Political Consultative Conference. So they come together every year to debate and approve issues that are determined by the Communist Party. And so and for NPC, it represents every province, and then centrally administered municipal cities, and then the region also include regions from Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan in passing laws, in discussion of passing laws. In the next section, we will just quickly go through the key priorities for 2022. For this year, China's decision to prioritize stable economic growth come in response to several new challenges threatening global economic performance, both foreign and domestic. From the domestic side, China is experiencing new wave of COVID, and then the government is seeking to support domestic consumer demand despite all the COVID lockdown. And on the international front, geopolitical tension is in the rise. And then therefore, the government has decided to drive domestic consumption economically, actively and continue job growth through robust investment and some new tax cut. Well, each year's two sessions are notable for setting national tone and policy priority for the upcoming year. This year is particularly important because in the fall of 2022, the 20th National Congress will take place, which is scheduled to take place and select the next round of leaders. Yeah. Here are some key targets. The GDP, based on the government work report, the GDP is set at 5.5%. CPI target is 3%, same as last year, with continued food price deflation. We're not expect that 3% target will be constrained for policy setting. And then employment growth remain a key focus for both ensuring full workforce is leveraged for economic development to ensure stability. The government also keep the target for job creation and surveyed employment rate at 11 million and less than 5.5%. So the government is working to meet economic growth to generate enough jobs. Here we just map up the key priorities because this year it was held, NPC was held shortly after the 2022 Olympic, which presents great political significance to China. Among these points, we will touch later in the next few slides, but these are the highlights that we see. For example, maintaining stable economic and urban job growth, continue commitment to expand market access to foreign capital and new free trade zones, focus on development of urban or regional, mega region and mega region, for example, the Greater Bay Area. And then most importantly, message on maintain course on dynamic zero COVID policy, and then foreign policy, etc. So we will talk more in the next few slides. And then John will give an update from our side on uncertainties and how we see Chinese government's strategy to tackle these.
Right. Probably the most greatest or pressing uncertainty at the moment is when China will open up. And really, for the last, we're now into the third year of the COVID epidemic. China on the whole has weathered the first few years very well. Compared to Europe, North America, and other markets, there were really, by the zero COVID policy, maintained the domestic economy quite well. However, the Omicron variant is really putting in a new area of uncertainty, in as much as it's really came in as the NPC was also taking place. It's in at least 28 provinces. And obviously there's been significant shutting down or close down of Xi'an and now Shanghai itself. So this is really an unknown, particularly for people wanting to come into China, an investment or people moving around. It is a certain significant uncertainty. We note there that President Xi in earlier this month talked about the need to minimize the impact of the COVID on economic and social development, and that will be challenging in the weeks and months before. When China opens up in this what's known as dynamic zero COVID policy is yet to be returned, and really places like Beijing, its rumors significantly just changing from week to week. Let's just move on. The other uncertainty that's hit is the concept of the Russian-Ukraine war, and particularly the position of China vis-a-vis Europe and North America. China's policy has been very much to have an objective and impartial position. It's walking a tightrope between two principles that it holds dear. First of all, the need for sovereignty and territorial integrity and non-interference. That's very much a byword in China's long foreign policy, and really the concept of the Ukraine has been invaded, leads to challenges there. And also the principle of indivisible security and legitimate security concerns of Russia. There is a close partnership and a 4,000 kilometer border with Russia. So that China has been abstained in both the Security Council and the General Assembly, and is walking that tightrope of being objective and impartial. The harshest words from China are more or less directed at the US and NATO as primary instigators of the dispute, and the concept of resurrecting the Cold War mentality. So that, and how that plays out in the coming weeks and months, is also an area that impacts. And to be able to navigate the sanctions regimes put in by the West is a key issue for China, and to be watched. Then let's have a look at US-China relations. To be very frank, we've been tracking and doing reports on US-China relations more or less weekly for about it's now well over 5 years. And what I would say is that despite the competition, despite the disputes, there is still a working relationship between China and the US, particularly bilateral grew by almost 30% in the last year. And there is at the recent March meeting, virtual summit meeting of Xi and Biden, there was a tacit understanding that both sides would want to maintain stability. Interestingly enough, because both Xi and Biden face elections, or at least congresses, at the same time late in the year. But again, as you see there listed items, there's plenty of things that can have to be managed in that relationship. Interestingly enough, even today, we have in Anhui a meeting related to Afghanistan, which the US has representatives there. It's called the Troika Plus, with the US, Russia, Lavrov, the foreign minister, is there in Anhui as well, and China plus Pakistan, and interestingly enough, Indonesia and Qatar and a number of other countries. So this is the dynamic that we've been seeing and will hopefully continue. Right, with that. Right, so despite these geopolitical headwinds and bilateral headwinds and domestic issues, China has taken the position of having an expansionary fiscal and monetary policies and financial policies. It is somewhat reminiscent of what happened 14 years ago with the global financial crisis, when China quickly pushed in a expansionary strategy to take it through that period. Obviously, at that point, essentially on infrastructure. Now, let's have a look at the key features of this expansion. First of all, there's boosting consumption. And really, if one goes through, spending is up by 8.4% year on year. Tax cuts are running to be at about 2.5 trillion yen, which is about 395 US dollars, billion dollars. And also local governments are getting a lot more money with 9.8 trillion yen, about 1.54 trillion US dollars. And there's strong emphasis on better social infrastructure, which Serena will talk about at the community levels. There's definitely an emphasis came out of the MPC on promoting yet further online, offline integration, digitization, the green and smart consumptions, particularly on appliances, smart appliances, new energy vehicles, and so on, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and promoting e-commerce into rural areas and services into rural areas. So that's a broad area under what a term that is being used, but actually didn't come out as clearly within the actual MPC, was dual circulation, in as much as getting the 400 million middle class spending their money in China, and what that has a roll-on effect of attracting FDI. And interestingly enough, between that dynamic of promoting middle-class spending and domestic consumption, then having an attraction to FDI. FDI last year was running at just under 15%, which is the first time it's hit double digits in over a decade. Yep. Let's. It has also been a time of security and promoting security, whether they're food, which we'll talk a bit later about, but certainly one of the key areas of energy security. As you may be or probably aware, China has ambitious targets for low carbon, with carbon peak in 2030 and neutrality in 2060. However, there was a little bit of a glitch in the second half of last year, where China hit power rationing based on about 9 provinces not hitting their targets for achieving what's called energy intensity. And that led to a cascade of events which led to power rationing in some key areas. So in many ways on energy, the ambition has been pulled back a bit. So it's we have a recalibrated short-term strategy for the energy sector with no targets this year for hitting improvements to energy intensity, though surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, that the target overall for the 5-year plan still remains at 13.5% improvement over those 5 years. So this is where the expansion strategy is having an impact in certain sectors. So no target for energy intensity reduction. Again, there's a concentration on building up strategic reserves and making sure that there is energy security in the mainland. As you see, there's no upper limit for target total energy use. That in effect has an impact of promoting renewable energy because that by the nature of the energy sector gives an advantage for the renewable energy sectors, and that's why leading to large-scale wind and solar power installations. So let's move on. Trade is doing very well. If you look at the trade figures, trading goods were up last year of just on 21.5%. There are also some factors in there which should lead to even stimulating further trade and investment. We've got the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, kicking in, which should bind and build greater regional trade patterns, particularly in Southeast Asia and East Asia overall, and down into Australasia. We've also got the free trade zones, and the negative list is also being curtailed, which again are areas which generate more investment. And the Belt and Road is got a little bit of a question mark on the Belt and Road initiative. So it has a question mark on what the real impact of the war is, but certainly its growth last year was 30% in many areas on just metrics of trains to Europe. In 2020, there was an average of 1,000 trains a month going to Europe from China. It went up 30%, so it's about before the war started, about 1,300 a month. And again, with its 148 members in the Belt and Road Initiative, is still a significant feature of China's flagship projects. Now, back to domestic issues. One key thing always in China is stabilizing employment. Again, there's an 11 million target for urban jobs. Again, there are a number of features to ensure that tax deductions, particularly for small and medium enterprises, R&D and manufacturing, with particularly a three-year science technology program, and increases in tax deductibility for such initiatives going up from 75% to 100%. I'd like to just highlight two programs that are just coming out. They didn't announce, but under the common prosperity area, just in the last few weeks, there's been announcements by the PBOC and the People's Bank of China, and financial institutions to promote, quote, new citizens and provide financial support for them. These are new citizens, termites of migrants, internal migrants in China, graduates from universities, or those working in the gig economy that normally don't have any rights, living in cities, limited rights to live in cities without healthcare, education, and a range of support. So there's a program, and these constitute about 300 million people. I just point that out as if that develops, it's from a financial point of view, it's rolling out the actual administrative programs for hukao, as they call it, residential licenses or residency. It needs to be followed up, but that would have a remarkably significant program if they're available, and banks are obliged to give them loans and so on, health and support, and governments with support for healthcare, education, and so on. All right. What I'd like to do is put it back to Serena to talk about business opportunities. Yeah.
Okay. So we've identified a few sectors that we think for MNCs there's remaining potential and then opportunities. For green development, President Xi stressed that it is necessary to pursue coordination between decarbonization, pollution control, and ecological conservation, and then to foresee economic growth. So based from what we learned from the government work report and the NPC earlier this month, we see that although no specific target for energy control for 2022, it also indicates a more relaxed approach to decarbonization. So this will lead to a more gradual phase out of traditional energy and then continued strong investment in the new energy sector and probably power grid. So the government work report continued previous tones on regulations to enhance in emerging sectors and against monopoly, and promise to support private sector, which also signal that regulatory tightening is probably reached its top end of last year, and then moving forward, the implementation of new rules are the new focus. So specifically, we see that energy efficiency improvement and clean production upgrade will continue to be implemented. We saw that data center and 5G facilities are the key areas for 2022, and then efficiency improvement campaign is the key, is one of the key focus. The government work report also called for green, low carbon model of living. So for this purpose, NDRC's 2022 work agenda also introduced plan for recycling of solid waste, in particular scrap metals, scrap cars, and used household appliance, plastics, and kitchen waste, etc. So another observation from our side is that several proposals made by political parties and renowned business leaders to address the topic of building a standard and reliable system for carbon monitoring, reporting, and verification, which is also included in NDRC's 2022 agenda. Moving to the healthcare sector, Chinese government aimed to turn healthcare into a major supporting pillar for China's national social welfare system and to respond to China's aging population and declining birth rate. Against such background and ongoing COVID pandemic, the government work report prioritized disease prevention as an important part of the Healthy China initiative. Central government will continue to improve China's disease prevention and control network, improve capacity for major epidemic monitoring, early warning, and investigation and tracing, emergency responding, etc. Our observation showed that primarily Keqiang emphasized priority of multiple healthcare tasks to provide equal access to disease treatment in areas of volume-based procurement, public hospital reform, equal opportunity distribution of high-value healthcare resources in not only cities but also rural areas. So that's for the healthcare sector. And then for financial market, we see that the MPC sent overall encouraging message to the market that strong physical support will provide willingness to apply additional policy to stabilize growth. And then, although the overall encouraging tone was witnessed, our observation thinks that bank and internet platform may face challenges. Because I'm a small and medium enterprise and manufacturer sector will be received, the government is initial agenda, they recommend these sectors to receive strong policy support to lower tax fees and targeted bank loans. But I think where this support and additional physical spending will go, based on the government work report, they calls for accelerated infrastructure construction project in area of hydraulic projects, transport, urban pipeline. So those should be somewhat help with the construction machinery and material sector. There is also continued focus on revamping the utility network through new renewable project and upgrade to urban pipeline. So based on these observations, we manufacturing and renewable industry will slightly not up to that speed for the bank and internet sector, which may need to give away some of their profit margin to support the sectors identified. For ICT related sectors, one of the main tasks we think is worth highlighting is that in the government's 2022 agenda, it's focused to build the necessary infrastructure to advance the digital China blueprint. So in particular, to provide Chinese economy with sufficient digitalized tools for sustainable and high quality development. So this task includes a series of large-scale ICT projects, for example, 5G connection, industry application, data center hubs, new internet exchange points, and internet backbone direct connection points. Among those projects, the most ambitious and most discussed and newly introduced is the East to West Computing Capacity Division project. So from this map, you can see the red one are the West hub, and then the blue indicates the East. So these projects aim to optimize the distribution of China's computing capacity between the two regions. And then the East China, which have a high demand for computing but is limited in natural resources, and Western China that has the natural advantage of green and cheap energy. So the data center cluster in the region will mainly support non-real-time computing tasks. Another observation from our side is that numerous MPC delegates and member of the CPPCC put forward motions on cybersecurity, notably for upgrade, protect digital infrastructure, passing legal restrictions on facial recognition application, clarify data ownership and trading rights, which focus on increasing the genuinity of current protection measures, which send out positive signals. For education, it is as we earlier mentioned, is increasing the quality and accessibility of public education to be a tool for increased birth rate for China. Early childcare and preschool education have been the major concern, and which was the agenda was touched on this year's work report. It calls for expansion of healthcare service and preschool education available to the whole population. And then increasing quality and accessibility of public education, reducing education costs for families to stimulate birth rate to more children, and concerning higher education between the curriculum offering and the actual needs for country's development strategy. So in particular, this year, the work report is calling for universities to train talent in STEM, agriculture, and medicine. Last but not least, social safety nets. So because we've said that people's well-being prioritized as social safety nets for family and elder extent, well, the initiative for common prosperities was temporarily sidelined. The government work report introduced plan for expansion of relieving costs for households. For example, for senior care and welfare, the 2022 work report mentioned retirement care 10 times as a key component of maintaining social stability and ensuring people's livelihood. For quality and accessibility of public education, China aimed to improve fairness. And then we see an emphasis on disease prevention through Healthy China 2030 aspects. So public healthcare service flowed as suggestions to pave the way for China's three-child policy. On crackdown on crime, trafficking women and children, one society issue of great concern is human trafficking. So in particular to women and children. So despite those from the NPC and CPPCC proposal to impose more intense punishment measure, Premier Li Keqiang stressed that criminal act will be severely cracked down on. So those are just some of the top line observation we have find. And from in the next section, John will give will share our key takeaways and implications for multinational operating in China.
All right, here we've got just an overview of some of the implications and the suggestions arising from this. China is embarking on a transformation technologically, and that creates in itself, whether it's on low carbon, change of the mobility, moving to hydrogen economies, etc. There are opportunities within all this upgrading of technology and industry and services. The government has made an emphasized that national treatment will be enforced in as much as if it's produced and made in China, you should have equal treatment always. Then it's improving over that area, in that area, and we'll see how that plays out in the coming years. Then there's China is always an element, particularly those not operating here in the mainland. Chinese are very similar in some ways to Americans. They're very patriotic. They have a confidence in their country, and that can lead to such things as nationalist boycotts and so on. So there needs to be that taken under concern, and that leads to positioning in the market that becomes quite important. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the COVID zero is unlikely to significantly shift in the short term. Whether it goes through till right after the party congress, and that is open to conjecture. And global tensions and US-China relations continue to require management and can affect business situations, whether they're on supply chains, whether they're on technology, whether they're on tariffs. And just some suggestions to exploring opportunities and preferential treatment for investing in high-tech sectors or inland regions area. There are great opportunities to be assessed, which we're seeing with clients and so on, whether it's in the whole area, as I mentioned, hydrogen economy, whether it's in ICVs, in intelligent connected vehicles, and again, the growth there. China has over half the world's electric vehicles at this point in time. Reassessing the market positioning and partnerships is always a requirement in China, given the pace of change and the change and developments within the market. And then reviewing communication protocols and crisis readiness. Again, there are internal suggestions within companies. What we'd like, and overall, I suppose, is really 3 strategies always for positioning in China: ensuring a commitment and a genuine commitment to the market, to supportive of the country, it's expected, and to make a contribution to the development and the communications therein to do that. Cooperation, again, China is no different to any other large market where foreign direct investment comes in for the benefit of the country rather than, and that must be in the form of either technology transfer or skill sets, change, investment, talent, and resource sharing, and then a contribution on to the development of markets and the efficiency of markets. So that is just what I would call a standard approach for being successful in China. With that, I think we should have time then to have some questions, Q&A.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. If you have any question, please go down to the Q&A icon and input your question in the Q&A section, and we will answer the question raised by you.
No, let's start.
Yeah. Yeah, we welcome you to input your questions in the Q&A section. And also, if you could talk in the chat box, we welcome you to put your questions in the chat box.
What's the Q&A there? Okay. All right, we've had a question about agriculture and agricultural policy. I would look at it, one, agriculture is a foundation and certainly a high priority of the government. The leading document each year is always about rural issues and agricultural policy. And agriculture is one of the security issues that is being highlighted by the government for sustainability. In as much as there's still the 1.2 million hectares, 120 million hectares redlined for agriculture. We've just been through a program of rural in the last 5-year plan of redressing poverty in the rural area, and the key word at this point in time is rural revitalization, which means to build clusters of commerce and clusters of services within rural areas. And also to ensure security of food supplies on key grains and key products. So really the emphasis on the rural areas and agriculture to be a point of growth within the whole country. That we can get back to you with the actual figures about, again, it gets into the various products that have their own targets, but we will follow up on those. But essentially, agriculture and the raising of incomes and commerce into rural areas is a key target within, and it's an ongoing target in the country. All right. All right, we've had a question whether, given the pandemic this year, can China reach its target of 5.5? A good question, and it's always a good question every year, whether China would hit its target. Normally the Western commentary is it's a glass half empty. Targets will be difficult, or targets and you know, there is a skepticism normally coming out of Europe or North America about Chinese targets. I suppose I've been here now coming up to 17 years, and China has remarkable levers to achieve its targets. Li Keqiang talked about it will be extremely challenging, and the three areas to overcome will be weakening supply, disruption of supply chains, and the third challenge to deal with would be weakening expectations in people. So I think that's one of the real emphasis on having an expansionary strategy, is to particularly impact the third aspect, to make sure that there isn't a sense within the population that things are going to get worse, which would have a dynamic of in effect leading to lower growth rates. But that's the government's target. It's in many, there's some commentary that it is a fairly conservative target. But to just give you a sense, that is growth 5.5, given the size of the economy now, is to have a complete Switzerland or Netherlands grow within the mainland as far as the size of the economy. And it's not, and China has a track record of achieving these growth rates, particularly with the expansionary program. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add a few numbers that we have picked up from the report, the government has seen how to achieve the 5.5 growth. Well, the government have laid out plans for expansion of fiscal policy driven by tax cut and refine. So the spending is set to increase more than RMB 2 trillion in 2022, which is a growth of 8.4% year on year. It's the largest in 4 years. And generous tax cut totaling RMB 2.5 trillion favors manufacturing sector and small and medium enterprise, which will be delivered primarily through tax credit and refund charges. And officially, although budget deficit is increased to 2.8% of GDP, this is partly due to the leftover from the previous years not being able to included as new expenditure. So for monetary policy, the government have reiterated their intention to keep money supply consistent with the GDP growth. So those are some of the data as in what we see.
Next question.
All right, we've had a question related to, is there really a place in China, in the economy for foreign players? It was based on a healthcare question. Favoring domestic products and manufacturing has been increasing in certain sectors during the last year, for example, in health, healthcare technology, up to a point where there is no market for anymore for foreign players. Do you see other sectors being closing? Actually, I'm surprised by this on healthcare, because healthcare, certainly in pharmaceuticals and in medical devices, we could argue about hospitals and so on, but on pharmaceuticals and medical devices, we've just been going through what I would call a golden era of healthcare, with most of the big multinationals here having significant growth, in the point of over a number of years, 20% growth a year, based on the opening up of particularly areas such as clinical trials and so on, and a growth of investment in particularly R&D centers and bringing the whole ecosystem of healthcare into the China market. The two areas where we see as being the golden sectors have been essentially healthcare and financial services, with the opening up of and the cutting back of restrictions on a range of areas of particularly such things as asset management, insurance, and even banking. I somewhat contend that certainly in healthcare, I'm sure there might be sectors where there is extreme competition from growing domestic companies, but we see that foreign players are doing quite nicely at this point in time.
Yeah, from the government work report, we have seen movements or government promotion or in new areas, for example, disease prevention, treatment, and then new suggestions for medical insurance, rural health, VBP, medicine, vaccination, medical institutions. So those are all areas where foreign player can participate. And then, for example, just take the medical institutions. So I mean, where the institution is calling for underdeveloped hospitals, specialized, including gynecology, pediatrics, mental health, and others calling for private investment, and then more players. Yeah, so we see many areas that's opportunity remains.
Yeah, the areas that are challenging is where China is investing a lot in R&D and is transforming its sectors. The one area that comes to mind is such things as the introduction of ICVs, smart vehicles leading to autonomous vehicles, with a series of that industry has significant funding, and also in the hydrogen area, significant funding, and foreign players are less likely to get subsidies, but also have to look for niche technologies and niche participation within those areas of, particularly in manufacturing, bringing a particular expertise particular technologies and niche areas. So that there is slightly more problematic, but as I said, finance and healthcare, I would put on one of the more open areas.
Yeah, I think that's all the questions we see for now.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, John. Thank you, Serena, for giving some splendid sharing about this China's 2 sessions. And thanks for coming to listen to us. And if you are interested, please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. We hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah.